Okay, so now we're coming from the farm, and we're coming into town, and we're going to be looking at TODs. Shelly Poticha is the president and CEO of Reconnecting America and oversees all the activities of the Center for Transit-Oriented Development. Reconnecting America is a national nonprofit that is working to integrate transportation systems and the communities they serve, with the goal of generating lasting public and private returns, improving economic and environmental efficiency, and giving consumers more housing and mobility choices. She's written several books, including The New Transit Town, Hidden in Plain Sight, Capturing the Demand for Housing Near Transit, and co-wrote The Next American Metropolis with Peter Calthorpe. Shelly Poticha.
Good afternoon, everyone. You must be really tired. You are such troopers. I'm going to switch gears here a little bit. We've just had this lovely presentation about the farm and life with food, and I was so transported by those images that Andres put forward, and the little house with the rooster, and now we're going back to the city. And I'd like to share with all of you some of my work that I've been doing lately to try and link up urbanism with transit and use the power of the real estate market, really, to change the way that we think about the opportunities in our cities and to begin to put in place what I think of as a lasting response to climate change. I run a national nonprofit organization. It's called Reconnecting America. I'm based in the Bay Area in California, and I also have an office in Washington, D.C. And we have two major projects. One is the Center for Transit-Oriented Development. Transit-oriented development, all different ways, all different places, all different types, anything you ever needed to know about what is going on in this field, who's working in it, and what are some of the cutting-edge techniques to implement it. The other big project that we have is a little more ambitious, I think. It's called Transportation for America, and it's a national campaign to reform the way that we think about federal transportation policy in America and what kind of transportation investments we ought to be making. I'm the co-chair of a national campaign with Jeff Anderson at Smart Growth America, also another longtime member of the Congress for the New Urbanism. And what's really interesting to me is that we have, with very little problem, brought together an amazing coalition of organizations and individuals from business, health, environment, urbanism, development, labor, politics, all with a common interest in how can we really bring together the way that we build our cities, the kinds of places we want to live in, and the kinds of transportation investments that we can make, and how can we set up a system that actually delivers the kinds of things that we'd like to see more easily. The next federal transportation authorization is likely to come forward, or is coming forward, toward the ends of this year. It's going to be a major discussion, at least in Washington, D.C., but it represents a fairly sizable amount of money that most communities get some access to. And we'd like to make sure that this time around it actually works for our communities. And it's this effort, both the kind of national transportation campaign and the work that we do on transit-oriented development, is in many ways coming from this viewpoint that we are at somewhat of a crossroads, that there are real changes in the way that our country is looking at issues and who we are, and that we need to come forward with a new set of strategies to really think about the way that we invest in our communities, what kind of infrastructure we make possible, and how we do it. And lately I've been kind of ruminating on the challenges that we created an incredibly elegant system to build the interstate highway system. And the Eisenhower administration, their vision to connect farms to markets, to connect regions together, to provide a defense system, all really worthy goals at the time. And in fact, we were enormously successful at creating a system for delivering the funds to allow state departments of transportation to build their portion of this national transportation network. And we have essentially, I think, kind of run the clock out on this. We've gone through several different iterations of federal transportation policy. All these acronyms up here are different versions of our federal transportation policy. Every 6 years, we put forward something that says how we're going to spend our money, and it hasn't really changed that much since the interstate era. There's a little bit of flex, but basically, we're continuing to put a lot more money into the system. We're driving a lot more. There is a tremendous amount of congestion in many of our communities. A lot of people are asking, okay, we're spending all this money, what are we actually getting? And the other kind of big challenge out there is that we built this incredibly elegant system for delivering a set of streets and highways and roads for a type of development that no longer really fits who we are as Americans anymore. And in some ways, we didn't even really, we've got a different set of problems and challenges that we need to begin to address. Ellen mentioned the whole challenge with gas prices. I think there's a real consensus that we don't know what's going to happen with gas prices over the next decade, and it was likely to fluctuate extensively up and down and up and down. There's the whole issue that we've been talking about in the public about energy security and how we can create a system in the United States where we're not so reliant on one type of energy. We created a whole system for funding transportation, but we actually didn't really entirely take care of what we built. We got really infatuated with building a whole bunch of new stuff, and now what we built over the last 50 years is starting to fall apart. It's reached its lifespan. And we borrowed against the funds that we've been using that have been set aside for maintenance. We borrowed those and put them into new capacity. And that, in many ways, is what has fueled the rapid growth in most regions, and where you see over and over again these very long lists of infrastructure needs to bring to what the kind of transportation people call bring to a state of good repair. Just fix it. And then part of what I've been most interested in is this whole issue about the demographic changes in America and how that's really creating a different demand profile of who is going to be out there in the real estate market, who wants to live in what types of communities, and how is that changing as we are an aging population, as we are ethnically much more diverse, as our preferences are changing, as we see new opportunities. All of these things, all of these sort of megatrends, I believe are creating a situation where we may have some momentum for making changes in both policy and what kinds of investments at all different scales. At the kind of national level, there's a real dialogue going on now about how can we begin to integrate the policy investments of, say, our Department of Transportation and our Department of Housing and Urban Development, a novel concept. But more importantly, I think that these conversations are happening in communities all over the country as people really look at new ways of living their lives and new opportunities. Transit ridership, actually this is a few months old, it's now at its 50-year high. Even after the gas prices peaked and went down, Americans are continuing to ride transit, all types of transit, at higher levels than they have for decades. And in some cases, we're almost overloading the systems where there just isn't enough capacity and ability to pay for more frequent service. So we're kind of in this bind. But over and over again, we're seeing a tremendous increase in need and desire for using transit as an option to get to work or to take care of daily errands or to just get around. And along with that, there has just been this exponential leap in interest by communities, cities, regions, in building new transit infrastructure. We, my organization, Reconnecting America, did a look around the country at transit projects that were being considered and planned and designed in communities, and we added up really quite easily about $250 billion worth of new projects being considered, from little trolleys to major new subway projects to high-speed rail and everything in between. It crosses about 80 cities around the nation. And just to kind of put that number in perspective, the federal government over the last 6 years spent only $9.5 billion on transit infrastructure. Actually, the $250 billion is sort of analogous to what the Ontario, Canada 5-year plan is. So there's a real mismatch here, I think, between the demand for transit, the growing recognition by communities that there's a real interest in this, and a sense that these kinds of investments help generate economic development in our communities. They help attract the kind of lifestyle that communities want to see. They are able to retain workers that cutting-edge businesses want to retain. There's a whole synergy of reasons why communities are beginning to go this route. And not the least of it is that a very sizable portion of the real estate market, simply based on demographic trends, not this latest slump in the economy, simply based on who we are and how we are growing as a country, we're seeing conservatively a demand for about 1/3 of the housing market wanting to be in places that are walkable, that are urbane, that are transit connected to other places in the region. And that's beginning to create a real recognition and shift in the discussion that's happening at the local level. So there are a lot of forces that are beginning to come to play here to show a demand for the kinds of neighborhoods that are connected by transit. And I think one of the telling pieces here is that the fastest growing demographic groups in the US are also the groups that have shown an interest in living in walkable urbanism connected by transit. So there's a real alignment of the future and this set of ideas. So many places are beginning to talk about and consider transit-oriented development linked with transit, as one of the key building blocks for a future sustainable city, an economically healthy city, and a city that makes it possible for all of us to share in the wealth that we're growing together. And for those of you who kind of have some special issue, you might see your topic on this list. affordable housing, green, health, mobility, connectivity, value creation. I don't want to oversell this whole notion of transit-oriented development, but part of the reason why we're seeing such an upsurge in interest in this field is because so many different interests can see themselves and how they fit in to this strategy. And additionally, I guess the thing that I kind of like about it is that basically the research is showing that this works. That people who live within walking distance of a high-quality transit service use it 5 times as much as people who live beyond that. People who work within walking distance of a good quality transit connection are 3 times as likely to use transit to get to work. And many people are rearranging their living situations and locations to be able to take advantage of transit connectivity. And when we went out and surveyed many of the projects, including projects in this region, that are located within walking distance of transit, we found that the number of auto trips generated by development in areas that are within walking distance of transit is substantially lower than development that has to be, every trip has to be accessed by car. I mean, this is like really super intuitive and common sense. But one of the challenges for this field is that we've been sort of lax on actually providing the data and the evidentiary base to convince skeptics that it really does work. And so now we're fanning out, commissioning research by Uber researchers to be able to come through and show us how these places actually perform. Now, when I talk about transit-oriented development, I know it's a really kind of wonky term. It's not all that exciting. But it is the term of art, as we say. But what I've noticed is that there is a lot of misunderstanding about what constitutes transit-oriented development. I actually think it probably should be called a transit-oriented district, because the greatest impact and the highest performance and the way that we actually measure benefits is at the scale of a neighborhood, of a whole place surrounding a transit line or a transit stop, that whole walking shed. And yet, what we often hear about when we hear about projects that are called transit-oriented development, it's often that one parcel that's next to the station, or the little bit of land that's across the street, or the parking lot. And that's great. That's really important to do a really great job at, but if we only focus on these little sites right next to the station, not only are we missing a tremendous amount of opportunity, but we're not actually utilizing this investment we're making in infrastructure to its greatest potential. And so I'd like us to all kind of begin to shift our thinking to not just these parcels next to the station, but the places and neighborhoods surrounding them. And the other kind of misconception that I always find, I'm sorry this is a little hard to read, but there's just an easy thing I just want to get from this, which is not all places that are connected to transit need to be the same. They don't all need to be high-rise development. We need a mix of different places to touch the transit network, as rich as all the kinds of places that we want to see in our region. Probably one of the most important attributes that we can try and instill in these places connected by transit is to ensure that they are truly walkable, so that we can have some places along a transit network that are lower density neighborhoods. Often a transit system is put in place through existing communities. This is from the city of Denver, where we help them put together, like attach that typology of places to the system that's being planned. Some of this exists and some of this is in the process of coming to be. And one of the things that we found is that all these very light colored circles, the yellow circles, these are all neighborhoods. These are all single-family townhouse neighborhoods with maybe a few little parcels that could be filled in over time. But you know what? Not a lot of potential for change. And nor is a radical transformation appropriate. We ought to be thinking about finer grained strategies to infill and reinforce the connections to transit and make it possible for people to live in their homes that they've been living in for many years and perhaps shift gears and use transit for some of their trips. There are a few places along this citywide network where more change is able to happen. And so these orange dots will be places where more intensive residential and residential supporting uses will be located, probably, you know, somewhere anywhere between 4 and, 20-story buildings. The red dots are also places that will become major urban places where there'll be a real mix of jobs and housing and regional serving retail uses. But this discussion in Denver, where we were able to say these are the specific locations where intensity should be directed, and these are the places that should remain sort of as they are, allowed the community to agree to move forward with some real changes in the way that they approached development and supported it. And I would just urge you to think about the way, the process of building cities around transit is as much about building consensus in a community to make change happen as it is getting the, correct urban design strategy. Now, the reality over the last decade is that we've had a real mix of outcomes with the types of places that have grown up around transit. Some of them have, really performed well in terms of market factors. Others have not done so well. Others have been driven by tremendous amounts of public subsidy. Others have not. We've seen a real mix of performance. And I think that there are a real confluence of factors that have led to this, not the least of which the fact that, we design and plan our transit systems in the transit silo or the transportation world, and we plan urbanism in a completely separate world. And often when we don't think of these together, we don't end up with the best set of outcomes. But our research is showing that when we do a good job, and we have a number of data points out there, there is a bump in the marketplace, that the value that is perceived in the market by the access that's provided by transit, by the cost savings that are attributed to lower parking standards, by the urbanism that's creates a set of a new value calculus that doesn't exist until you really have transit in place. And that additional value is something that we're focusing on more and more, because one of the challenges of transit-oriented development is that it's really hard to build the rich, robust, complex, inclusive places that we want to see in our communities entirely by the forces of the market. And so we're trying to find ways of capturing value that is created by the market to help pay for some of the things that we like to see but are difficult, like great local streetscapes, like community parks that are scaled to urban places, like affordable housing integrated into neighborhoods in sensitive ways, like maybe a local food store. There are all kinds of strategies that our communities are using right now and experimenting with to try and recognize that, yes, we can create value, but we need some of that value in order to deliver the complete story that we want to have. Now, there's a big, gigantic caveat that I want to offer with all of this, which is that the cost of doing development in many of these places is extraordinarily high. It comes from a whole range of factors. These are just some of them. But over and over again, we're in communities where even the densities that we'd like to see around the transit stations can't be penciled by the developers. That either the market has not been demonstrated for that particular product type, or the rules might be in place locally that just make it practically impossible to build at this density, or there are a whole series of other factors that make it practically impossible to deliver the great urbanism that we want to see around these public transit systems. And I raise this as a caution because basically for two reasons. One is there is often an assumption on the part of a community that we can exact our way toward a complete set of development types that deliver all the great benefits that we want to see. So, you know, we can say, well, developer, you have to build dense, you have to build green, you have to build affordable, you have to do all the bells and whistles that we want our community to be able to have. Now, there's nothing wrong with those goals. The problem is that it is often impossible for an individual developer to be able to pay for all of that in their development pro forma. And so we need to think, again, about how we deliver these important benefits and share the cost of those, particularly those that really benefit people beyond those that live in that particular development. So that's one caution, that it's not so simple. We have to be really careful and cognizant about the bottom line. Second is that what has transpired over the last run-up in the real estate market is that the vast majority of the development that has happened, particularly the residential development that's happened around transit, has been aimed at the highest end of the real estate market. So the highest cost housing. And that's mainly because the developers have to recoup their costs. They have to make a profit. They have to be able to develop. And so this then raises an issue for me. And that is that we are investing public monies in building transportation infrastructure, whether it's streets or highways or public transportation. And I think that we ought to make sure that people of all means have the ability to access and use that public infrastructure. And one of the main kind of reasons that I feel that this is so important is because of the data that we've been collecting. I think we're now up to 50 regions in the United States where we've been collecting and mapping the information on how much people are spending on housing and how much they're spending on transportation. And Ellen mentioned this earlier. In pretty much every region that we've looked at, places where the home is located where your only option is to drive for almost every trip, you are spending on average about a quarter of your income on transportation-related expenses For working families, lower income families, this actually generally exceeds the cost of housing. In places where you have the option of walking, biking, and taking transit, you're saving, and your transportation expenditures are more like 9%. So in these times, not only should we make it possible for everybody to have the option of living this life where they're not putting so much money into throwaway transportation costs, but for low-income households, moderate-income households whose incomes really are pinched, it seems that we ought to be making sure that they have access to this kind of lifestyle as well. And we're actually working with a whole network of affordable housing policymakers and advisors to try and find ways to focus the investments that we are making in affordable housing into these locations in a mixed income fashion so that we allow people of all incomes to be able to access this incredibly valuable, now we know, infrastructure, and to catalyze markets. And one of the challenges that we face is that we are kind of used to working in our own little worlds. The developer does his piece, the planner and the city does another piece, the transportation folks do a different one, and we need to bring those together into better alignment and think that the plan is the start of something. It is not the end. And more, there's a real need to ensure that we are coordinating all the stakeholders that have a role in implementing this notion of urbanism connected to transit. I'm sorry this is not showing up very well, but I'll post this so you can grab it and take it. But you know, local government, metro government, state, the Federal Transit Administration, transit agencies, the development community, even the US Treasury, community groups aren't even on here. There are a lot of players that actually do have an important role, big and small. They come in at different places in the process. But the more that we begin to recognize that there are many stakeholders and they need to be coordinated, they need to understand what their great value added is, the better and more efficient our delivery system will be. So for the second half of my presentation, I just wanted to kind of highlight a few implementation innovations that I'm seeing around the country, and then I'm hoping there'll actually be a little time we could talk. So this is sort of, I don't know, potpourri. And it's mainly intended to just, you know, stimulate your thinking about what you might see in your communities, what might be something you can take and use. Nothing more than that. I mean, at the kind of really basic level, there's the information side of living this lifestyle where you're not driving all the time. And I'm on the board of a group called Walk Score. David Goldberg, who's also here, is on this board, this advisory board also. And this is a website that's really just trying to say, look at the possibilities of walking in your neighborhood. And it rates neighborhoods according to their walkability. And increasingly now they're starting to add in, if you buy a house in this location, where can you get to on public transportation within 15 minutes, 30 minutes, 60 minutes? It's just an information tool to kind of help people think about when they buy a home, could they live this different kind of lifestyle? Next idea. There are so many communities around the country, this is just like a little snapshot of them, who have gotten tired of The idea of spending 10 years working on one transit line and then moving on to the next. And they're just building whole new systems. Denver is sort of the leader in this. They passed a ballot measure, I think 3 years ago now. They're building 5 new transit lines in 15 years. And just in the last year, the city of Denver has agreed to build a streetcar network that'll link into the main system. Houston, back and forth and back and forth. Salt Lake, these guys are geniuses. They built a line, they built another line, people were excited, they decided, okay, let's just go for broke. They're adding 4 new lines with this incredibly creative agreement with the federal government that it gives them the ability to leverage investments from private sector investors to the federal monies, very creative, helps them actually move through the process quickly. And when I was there a month ago, they had another 5 lines in the drawing boards. So there are all these places that are saying, you know, we see this as the future, but we're not going to wait around forever. And they're using all kinds of different technology to get there. So most of these systems are a real mix of commuter rail and light rail and trolleys and electric trolleys and bus rapid transit and regular old bus. And it's the networking that really creates the ability to live the life of not having to drive for every single trip. It's not a dedication to a particular type of transit. It's the fact that you can get from your house, you might ride your bike to the train, you get on the train with your bike, you get to work, you work all day, you take the trolley to some other place for dinner, and then maybe you ride home on your bike or take a cab. But you know, the more that we think about the future as being a way of life rather than a dedication to a particular type of transit technology, we'll begin to really see people's behavior change. And this is just a little set of maps that we've been doing that map each region at the same scale and with a simple line show the extent of the transit network. It's a few years old, so it might be a little bit out of date, but you know, you can just kind of understand that if you have a very extensive transit network, so many more people can live and work along that system that it's going to have a much bigger and more higher impact on both the way that people behave, how they get around, but also the real estate market. So I don't know why, I mean, this is just super common sense stuff, but we never really talk about the bridging of these two worlds. The other little thing that's sort of happening out there is this kind of revival movement in streetcars. And some of you saw this book that I helped put together. We just got our 2nd edition out. It's called Street Smart, Streetcars and Cities in the 21st Century, and it kind of began to document what's happening in communities where there's a real interest in investing in permanent transportation infrastructure, even if it's at a scale that would work just fine for a local bus route. And that's in part because of the enormously attractive power of streetcars to attract real estate investment. This is just a little chart of some of the recent streetcar projects showing the initial system cost and the return on investment, not a single one being less than 1,000%. And part of the attraction here is that these kinds of projects can be built rapidly. There's a real easy case to make that these can be funded with public-private partnerships. Most are not being funded with federal funding, so they can actually happen fast. And they are working. So Portland was sort of one of the first places that used a modern streetcar to connect up and stimulate reinvestment in two big underutilized brownfield areas, enormously successful projects. I'd really suggest going and looking at this. Tremendously great outcomes. They're doing all kinds of research to begin to look at how the streetcar investment, the active investing in the streetcar, changed the way that the development community looked at developing in these areas, and in fact is helping to stimulate development at the top of the zoning envelope rather than what was happening before, which was just sort of middling response. Kenosha, another small city where they built the cheapest streetcar I've ever seen in my life. I think it was $4 million a mile. Tampa, another place that's doing this, connecting two parts of the city that really aren't walkable and connected, divided by an elevated freeway, and stimulating the real energy in an entertainment district. So that's sort of the 2 cents on streetcars. Now I want to move on to a few other kind of innovations that are happening out there. Maybe they work, maybe they don't. In my region, we've recently adopted through our regional transportation agency something we're calling a TOD policy. It conditions the allocation of new transit capital money on local jurisdictions adopting plans that support development at a minimum threshold. Enough bodies around the transit system to justify the expenditure of fixed rail transit. Now, in exchange for this stick saying you gotta do this, communities that are touched by the transit system are eligible to receive planning grants of up to $750,000 apiece to put together the plans, to do the environmental clearance, and once those plans are accepted, there's no further environmental review that's necessary for the individual development projects. So we think it's actually a streamlining effort. The other thing that we've done in our region is that we take transportation monies, state transportation highway monies, and we use them for transit-oriented development. We've just increased our pot to $60 million a year, and these funds can go toward local infrastructure, parking structures, affordable housing, the offset of extra density, local parks, and it's awarded on a competitive basis to the cities in our region. It's an incredibly popular program. We also have a whole network of community advocates who are out there supporting intensive development around transit and helping to engage communities in the process of talking about how change can happen. And that has also helped really change the attitude in our communities about transit-oriented development. Just on the right here, all those little dots, those are all the places where we're doing transit-oriented development plans right now. All of those funded, most of them funded through that program I just mentioned. And almost all of them have a community-based element as part of it. Strategic planning. Okay, so I showed you this image earlier. I think one of the challenges that a lot of communities have is that, you might have more than one transit station in your community. As you think about the future, how are you going to prioritize where to put resources? And so this strategic planning tool can help say, okay, these places need intensive remediation. They need real TLC. We're going to put a lot of our city resources into these locations. But these other locations, the market is doing a pretty darn good job. Let's just watch what's going on. Let's monitor it. But let's not, strangle it. And so we've created this little tool. I know this is really geeky. But we're starting to develop tools that help public agencies, staff in particular, sort through where the development opportunities are, where's the market emerging, where is it really not all that useful to spend time now until the market revives. Really try and help prioritize where to focus. Another tool, we're increasingly seeing property values rise around transit facilities. Now, even in this latest economic downturn, I think Ellen showed this slide of, where the foreclosures are happening. Places in urban places, places in suburban communities connected by transit are not falling apart nearly at the rate as those auto-dependent neighborhoods. And so in this downturn, we're actually working with a network of cities around the country to put together acquisition funds that could help go and acquire properties in advance of the run-up of the market to be able to ensure that when it is passed to a developer, that we're able to afford the kind of community benefits we want to see in transit-oriented development. And this is just an example from the Boston region where we're looking at land prices, changes around the different transit lines that come into the city, and the green line is actually a line that's not yet built and is about to be built. So where can we begin to focus investment of city and actually philanthropic resources to purchase properties? Another example, in the Twin Cities, there's a light rail line that's envisioned to connect downtown Minneapolis with downtown St. Paul. The two downtowns, a university, hospital, bunch of employment, and a whole series of neighborhoods in between. These neighborhoods are the landing spot for Southeast Asian immigrants. There are just thousands of businesses that they've created there. And it's also one of the, frankly, last remaining African-American neighborhoods in this region. And so there's a lot of interest in transit, there's a lot of interest in development, but there's a lot of anxiety about the wrong kind of development and the possibility that people might get pushed out. So we help them put together a vision for the long-term future for this corridor, not just a station, but the whole corridor. And that helped them understand that there are different types of opportunities for change as you work along the corridor. That, again, not every tool is appropriate for every location. You have different market conditions and physical conditions and community conditions in different parts of the corridor. But also there's a real different potential for change along this corridor. And working through this kind of learning process helped the community and, frankly, the developers understand where it was all heading. And now they're implementing all kinds of different initiatives to help ensure that their long-term vision happens. And it will happen with the market, but it also has spurred the creation of a $5 million annual fund provided by the local foundation community to help preserve affordable housing, to support local businesses, and to deliver the kinds of things that are tough for the public sector to do on their own. Another idea. In the Bay Area, we helped to revise the rules by which BART, which is our DART, looks at development of their properties. And they had for years, basically our region just has these transit stations with gigantic parking lots around them and not much development. We're trying to understand why is it really tough to develop these properties? And one of the big reasons is that the agency was requiring every parking space to be replaced one for one in a parking structure no matter if there was more transit connectivity from the neighborhoods. And the cost of those parking structures was more than the amount of money they could get for their property. Much, even, so basically they were getting zeroed out by insisting on this replacement parking strategy for every single station. They've moved to kind of a two-pronged effort. They've looked at their whole system and they've figured out, well, here are the places where we really need to prioritize park and ride, and we're gonna invest in those places. But other places we're gonna really support community development. And in addition to not requiring every parking space to be replaced, we're also going to think about our land opportunities a little bit more like a developer than a transit agency. And part of that came from the experience in this project that has gotten a lot of attention. It's called Fruitvale Transit Village, where the BART station is that red box. And you can kind of see the big arc of the street. Everything between the BART station and that street was a parking lot for years and years. They replaced the surface lots in the BART parking structure, the yellow box, and they partnered with a community development corporation to build this incredible walking shopping street surrounded by mixed income housing, opportunities for small-scale businesses and offices. It has a health clinic and a daycare center and a bike valet. I mean, it's got pretty much every bell and whistle you could think of. But the project itself financially is dying. And one of the reasons that it's dying, we think, is because people come out of that BART parking lot and they take a left turn and they go right into the parking structure. And they don't walk down the Paseo and shop and stroll and pick up a few things for dinner. They go right into their cars. And so BART has changed their rules now to separate the BART parking from the station. So if they did this again, they'd probably put it at the end of the shopping street so that people would walk a block, big one block, past all these stores that they actually financially supported. And that might be a way to get both community revitalization, more income to the transit agency, and a better liveliness in this area. This is now the model that's being used at about 5 other stations that are in development. And that's kind of the model here that I think transit-oriented development is moving toward, this whole public-private partnership that is about really trying to ensure that we're not just plunking down development around this transit station and not thinking about the kind of places that we're creating, but we're thinking about placemaking as the driver for transit-oriented development. And typically, that requires a partnership to be able to do it. So there are lots of places around the country that are beginning to change their way of doing business to be much more oriented in this way. Now, I just want to close with sort of a little comment, and I guess it sort of relates to some of the other presentations today too, which is all the evidence is showing that this approach to development and rebuilding is really good for our climate. There are all kinds of additional benefits. You saw on that early slide this huge big list that I was trying to compile. And I'm having a hard time keeping that list on one PowerPoint slide these days. But if we add to the climate change equation the location and pattern of development, we're likely to build in a resilience that we're not seeing was simply an approach to building technology or an approach to clean fuels or an approach to clean vehicles. And I would posit that if we just simply met the demand that is out there for this kind of urbanism, we would be able to significantly reduce the amount of emissions that are coming from the transportation sector, which nationally are about 30% of all emissions. But in urban areas, in my region in California, half of the emissions are from the transportation sector. So if we are going to become more climate neutral, more climate sensitive, we need to do both the technological stuff, but also the urbanism, because the urbanism, it will be the way to ensure permanence. So I want to thank you very much, and I've really enjoyed being here.